Recording in progress.
Hello, the topic of my presentation is the music of Herbie Nichols. What I'm going to be discussing for most of the presentation is three of his compositions, three of his best known compositions, and all three are taken from this 1956 Blue Note record that he made called Herbie Nichols Trio, which, in addition to Herbie, features Al McKibben on bass and Max Roach on drums. So the three we're going to talk about are The Lady Sings the Blues, which is his most famous composition, The Gig, and 2300 Skidoo. And then I just gave you a sneak peek of the second portion of my presentation, which is subsequent artists who devoted their time and practice to recording music that Herbie himself wasn't even able to record. Um, but in terms of the compositions, the way I'd like to discuss them, instead of going measure by measure and tune by tune, is organizing it into five major talking points that apply to all three. The first one of these is introductions. Um, each one of these tunes has an introduction that harmonically and melodically does not really borrow from the head or the blowing form. Um, so let's take a look at the first intro, which has a lot of in common with the other two. The first thing it has in common is that it begins with a slow harmonic rhythm. In this case, it's one chord to a bar, essentially, and then it finishes with a much faster harmonic rhythm. See, at the end, it's four chords to a bar, um, and then the third bar is left empty. So let's compare that to the next one, the gig. Um, so this is a 9 bar introduction, and these beginning chords, the A flat, A, and F chords, are more sustained. I notated them with a fermata because that's how he sort of plays it in his recording. And then immediately it goes up to tempo at about 230, and it's every beat has its own chord. And then, just like in the previous tune, the end of the introduction is left empty. Well, it's a drum solo. So in terms of harmony, there's nothing happening, but the drums are the featured melodic instrument. And then finally, you'll find that 2300 Skidoo is pretty similar. The opening chords are sustained and the harmonic rhythm is slower, and then it speeds up in the second half. And it speeds the acceleration effect was so important to him that he even took out two beats from the final bar, resulting in a bar of 2/4, leading up to the top of the A section. So the form is an integral part. Excuse me. His introductions are an integral part of his forms, and so now I want to talk about other aspects of his form. Um, the first is that none of these are really AABA the whole time. The closest thing to AABA is The Lady Sings the Blues, and that's just because it's really just because his blowing is AABA. But you have to account for the introduction, which does come back um, after he plays the head out. Another interesting aspect of this form is that in the last chorus of blowing, it's a piano solo for the whole blowing, except for the bridge of his last chorus, which is Al McKibben taking an 8 bar solo, and then the final A section of his last chorus is back to piano blowing, which is highly unusual. And then it finishes with a brief drum solo, which is going to be a recurring theme here. So let's go over to the gig. This is the gig. The blowing form of the gig is 67 bars because the A sections are 17 bars. split into it's 9 bars plus 8 bars. The bridge is 8 bars, and so is the C section. But put together, it does come out to be a 67 bar form, and this one also goes back to the intro. Well, the intro, harmonically and melodically, is the same material, but it feels different because it's stated rhythmically in such a way that it stays within the tempo of the blowing. Kind of the quarter note equals 236, so it's essentially the same, but it's almost as if the feel is different because it doesn't change. And then this one also ends with a short drum solo, following restatement, the second statement of the introduction. And then finally, 2300 Skidoo also ends. Yeah, there's a sort of symmetry to this one because this at the end of the head out, there is the bar of 2/4, or really, it's like it's 7.5. The final C section is kind of like 3.5 bars instead of 4. Um, and then that goes right to the introduction, which is followed again by a brief drum solo. And the blowing form of this is 36 bars. It's A, which is 32, and then the C section is a quick kind of 4 bar. I wouldn't call it a tag because it's not necessarily related to the previous melodic content, but it is kind of a 4 bar addition. So that's an example, yet another example of his somewhat unusual forms. Um, okay, our third topic is his chord qualities. Now we're going to get into kind of his actual harmony. Um, Generally, what's interesting about his chord qualities is kind of to discuss what he's not playing, and what he's not doing is filling out every voicing. And for this reason, it's often is assigning a specific chord quality to everything he plays is usually not the best way to go about analyzing his harmony, because a lot of it is just completely stated in the bass and the melody. Um, so, for instance, in the lady sings the blues. Let me make sure my original sound is on so that you'll be able to hear this. Great. Okay, should be no problem. Okay, so this is essentially it. So those are kind of the first 5 sounds. And that's really harmonically all that's happening. Now, I left out the minor third, which is in all of these. Excuse me. That's really it. Anything in addition to that is really unnecessary, and he does not play. He does not play anything in addition to that. Um, and then the bridge, the bridge brings up a later topic. I'll discuss that in a few minutes. So let's look at the next one and kind of I'll show to you that that's how he writes a lot of these tunes. Let's look at this. A section sounds like this. That's how he starts it. I mean, how do you notate that? I mean, there's not even a third. So what I would say is don't even worry about it, you know? The important part is this is the bass and this is the melody. That's all the information you need right there. And this, well, I'll talk about how this affects his blowing in a second. Um, and then let's look at, well, the most significant example, in my opinion, of that concept in this tune is the bridge. The melodies to the bridge is this. I'll play it slowly. Okay. And so instead of so essentially the key centers go around and go descend by minor thirds. But instead, so if you had to assign a quality to all these chords, it would be dominant just because you have this, kind of emphasizing a dominant seventh. But instead of filling out all these voicings and playing something like this, or something like that, this is what he plays. He just plays the root in octaves in his left hand and then lets the melody tell everything else. So that this is what I'm talking about when I say uh, all the information is really contained in the bass and melody. And in this way, this is why I consider a lot of the time Herbie Nichols to play his trio to kind of be like a chordless piano trio, as funny as that sounds to say. Although it is a chordal instrument, a lot of the time when he plays things like this, I mean that's acting as I mean if it were say drums, bass, and tenor saxophone, that's how it would be played because the bass and the melody, and that's all he does. And then you'll find, well, 2300 Skidoo is really the same type of deal. Um, all these, really all these qualities are established alone by the bass and melody. And then the consistently, the exception to this is his introductions. He plays a pretty harmonically dense introduction here, as in this one, as in the gig, and he also does in the way he sings the blues. So it seems that the one time he consistently liked to play chords is when he's introducing his tune, and at the very end when he plays the same material. Um, okay, that leads me to my fourth talking point, which is his improvisation techniques, which are based mostly on paraphrasing and uh, kind of motivic improvisation. In this way, in his approach, seems to take inspiration from Monk because he really, when it gets to the blowing, he really doesn't go more than four measures without referencing the melody. And particularly, well, yeah, in The Lady Sings the Blues, in his blowing, he begins every A section with, and then he plays that, I believe, every single A section. So I'm more than almost any pianist, it's like almost entirely based on the melodies he's already written. I want to say 90% it's that. Um, and then in the gig, what he plays almost every time is he comes back, some variation of. Now, what he does that's interesting is he rhythmically displaces it, which is part of why I guess he can get away with consistently doing that. Then on the bridges, he always plays the melody. Um, so he always comes back to that. Um, the one exception to that sort of approach on this tune is in the second part of the A section. The head sounds like this. And on those kind of suspended dominant chords, he does play kind of bebop influenced lines, which I would say is kind of where his Bud Powell influence can be most clearly heard. But in my interpretation, in terms of his overall approach, he's much more similar to Monk than to Powell, although people do compare him to both. Um, and then my final talking point has to do with those dominant chords. Um, for the most part, when there's a dominant chord in his tune, it is unaltered. You can pretty much do this. Because it's not really. So let's check out. Um, Yeah, because the melody often is too busy for him to, well, I guess a possible reason that the melody is often too busy for him to play really altered voicings under it. So it's this whole thing, that's that those all those resolutions and alterations, not really a huge part of his composition process, which is to me why he's so different from Bud Powell because those cadences aren't necessarily emphasized with altered notes. Um, okay, so now that we've talked a decent amount about the musical content, I want to get to my second point, which is the second portion of my presentation, which is subsequent jazz musicians who recorded his music as sort of a tribute. And the most significant of these is trombonist Roswell Rudd, who made three Herbie Nichols records. Roswell played with Herbie Nichols between 1960 and 1962, and so that's how he was introduced to him. And here is I have here this record is called Regeneration. It was recorded in Italy in 1983. This is a beautiful album cover. You have Herbie on the left, and here's Monk on the right. And Steve Lacy plays saxophones, which, considering that it's also a Monk record, I guess is not a surprise. Um, there are three Herbie Nichols uh, compositions on this one, as well as three Monk compositions. Uh, Now, I'll go to the next Roswell Red collection. These are two full uh, trombone trio records of only Herbie Nichols music. And this was recorded in 1997. Interestingly enough, the drummer is John Bacon, who I think is a Buffalo area drummer. I think he teaches at Fredonia now. So that's kind of a local connection. And I think these records were made in Western New York. Um, so a lot of these tunes Roswell recovered from Herbie Nichols' his flooded basement, and he found all these tunes that Herbie had never recorded. Now Herbie had two significant Blue Note records, but that was not nearly enough to record. He had written about 140 pieces. Two records is not enough to record all of that. So this was the first time that many of these were ever recorded. And these records were the unheard Herbie Nichols records and made right at the end of the 20th century. Um, okay, there's another Herbie Nichols kind of interpreter that I want to discuss, and this is the band slash collective known as the Herbie Nichols Project, which was started by the pianist Frank Kimbrough, who preceded Gary in Maria Schneider's band. And he started this band in the middle of the 90s. And although there were some regular members like Frank and Ted Nash played on all three of these records. Um, it was mostly a collective, which is to say the personnel did switch around. Jeff Ballard plays drums on the first one, um, but not on the others. Wycliffe Gordon plays trombone on the third one. So it's essentially a collective of people who were sort of excited about playing the music of Herbie Nichols. And there are three. First, Love Is Proximity from 96, Dr. Cyclops' Dream from 99, and then Strange City from 2001. And I believe it's on Strange City. There's a tune of Herbie's that they play called Bartok, which is a reference to, of course, Bela Bartok, who Herbie cites as one of his two main European influences, which were Bartok and Eric Satie from France. Um, so these records, in addition to the Roswell Rudd records, are important to bring up because Herbie was relatively underappreciated during his lifetime. He didn't live very long. He died in the 60s. Um, and after he did die, he received some more recognition, but still, he's not every pianist studies him. But it's these musicians like Frank and Roswell who were heavily influenced by him, who devoted a lot of their time to being, championing his music and recording it, um, which is pretty admirable in my opinion. And Frank, unfortunately, passed away a few years ago, but I suppose he was one of the piano educators who would uh, really promote uh, Herbie's, approach. He himself cited him as a main influence. Um, so I discussed his music, I've discussed his legacy, and I hope you found it informative. And uh, I have, I suppose, given you these six records as references if you want to go listen. I don't think many people listen to them. I think the Herbie Nichols project has 7 monthly listeners on Spotify. So, I mean, these are exactly the kinds of bands that we like to check out, right? But anyway, that's my presentation, and thank you for watching.